Well, hi everybody and welcome to our house. My name is Leanne De Souza. There's going to be a beautiful afternoon we share together. Hopefully you feel calm and peaceful in what I feel is my little sanctuary is open to you. But firstly, I'd like to introduce Gaja Kerry here, who is going to give us a welcome to country. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. So I'd like to acknowledge those who've gone before us and our elders and your elders and the lovely pathways and threads that they left for us to pick up and walk along together, you know. I have something that I wrote a couple of years ago and it's called Guri Blessing, and it's just to bless your being here today but also being on Yagara country. My tribe are the Gurunpul tribe, and this talks about Dandaru ironbark tree. As you travel across this Yagara country, may you stand strong and tall as Dandaru. May your roots be wings that fly you ever higher. As teacher, learner, come to share the gift of you. May Bira, sun, be warm and welcoming on your face, uplifting your soul with story and spirit of place. May your binangs be open to Guri yarning, plain, many stories, some of laughter, some of pain. Gentle may your jinangs walk upon our land as ancient rhythms whisper to help you understand where we are different and where we are same. Since time immemorial, Guri wisdom does remain. Whether you are on Yagarajara or life's travels near and far, Garumba Bira Wanjana, Nyuru Nia Banyambali, and protect you, bless you and protect you, and return you home, tall and strong as Dandaru. So with that I'd like to say, Bibalka Nyambali. Welcome all on the Yagara country. Thank you.
My name is Cathy Hunt. I'm the executive producer of the WOW Australia and the festivals that happen here. I'd also like to acknowledge, obviously, the traditional owners on whose unceded land we are meeting today and gathering today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, including all those First Nation women from across the country, not just here in Brisbane, but across the country, who have been working with us for the last few years. But certainly from my point of view to Sandra Phillips again. She's getting a lot of nods, Sandra. But, no, lucky you came, eh? Lucky you came. Sandra, who's been our cultural advisor from the beginning and is now on the board of the festival. And in WOW tradition, I'd also like to acknowledge all women who are no longer with us today. Some are mothers, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, because without them, we probably wouldn't be here doing the jobs that we're doing. And there's one other woman I have to acknowledge today, and I'm going to try it without tearing up, and that's Ruth Bader Ginsburg. As many of you would have heard, that she passed away this morning, and it's really important to acknowledge her for many, many reasons, as you know. I mean, particularly because of the work she did throughout her incredibly long life for women and women's rights in the States. But the one thing that people don't know about her, and I didn't until I saw the recent film, was that the very first case she won and became famous for was actually defending a man. And she was actually defending that man because he was unable to get caring subsidies for looking after his mother because he was a man. Now, that is so important, I think, in the context of the conversation that we're going to have today, in the context of what we think of our value and what we place, the value that we place on different roles within our economy. To Leanne De Souza, to Tim, Georgina, Edward, thank you so much for allowing us to be part of this. Do you want to just say a couple of words as to why you were prepared to do it? How you convinced the family that they could do it?
Well, thank you very much, Cathy, and welcome everybody again to our house. And thank you, Gaja Kerry, for that beautiful welcome to country. I think when we bought this house, we moved here in 2007 on the eve of the GFC, so it's some great irony we're having a conversation today about next economy when the get a house and then it all went. So thank you, it was so special to have that in our house. I'd also like to acknowledge Sandra Phillips. I'm an undergrad at UQ, and having you here as one of the associate professors is really wonderful. And I'd also like to acknowledge the two Debs up the back there who are part of the program, part of the project that we'll talk about. And I've known Jo Pratt, who works with Cathy, for a long time. So thank you, Jo. And I've always, when we did this little reno in the middle of Festival 2018, which was stressful, my dream as a little girl was to have a wall of books. And so when we did that, I always knew it would make a great backdrop for something at some time. So Jo dragged Cathy here and we sat around the kitchen table and sort of workshopped. I left the music industry 5 years ago for a lot of reasons that we'll touch on. So to bring a conversation like this with this wonderful artist who I'm working here, but you'll hear more about, Lydia, I just sort of leapt at that opportunity to have the conversation. And then really the family just roll with me. I've worked in music. They're up the back there. They've all worked in music and events for many, many years. So to bring my work, this is the work, my workplace is live shows and conversations. And so to just bring it into my home, they didn't really get a say. I put it in the diary. But this morning at 8 a.m, they said, there are a lot of people here. Yeah, it's a production. It was a great honour to be asked, and to also align with the Brisbane Festival.
For us to be in your home.
Thank you.
Fine. So right, why are we here? Why are we here for this event called Domesticity in this amazing house under the title New Economy? What are we talking about? Well, throughout May and June, when we were consulting with women for the global event that we did online, everybody we spoke to, they kept coming up with this same phrase. It's like going back to the 1950s. And we thought, and these were people who didn't even know what the 1950s were because they were much too young to know what the 1950s were about. But that phrase is like going back to the 1950s, going back to the house, going back to the domestic space, going back to a space where traditionally that's what you do. You're back to looking after the children. You're back to doing the housekeeping and the housework and the emotional stuff that you're doing as well, looking after your partner, looking after the kids, looking after friends, looking after other members of the family. And in between all that, if you were lucky enough as a woman to still have a job, you were working from home as well. Probably from the kitchen, because guess what? Your partner was possibly also at home and was probably male, possibly male, and probably had another room in the house that they were working from. The number of women I know who've been working from the kitchen, very interesting. So we thought, we've got to look into this. Let's go back into the domestic space and think about what that all means. So we thought that many life decisions are made around the kitchen table, so let's bring it back to the kitchen table. Hence, as Leanne says, originally we were all going to sit around the kitchen table, but we're not allowed to anymore. So we're doing it this way. Now, Jane Caro delivered an amazing keynote last night, which covered all the themes of the weekend, including the significant impact the recession is going to have on women, and a damning appraisal of the federal government's response to it through a focus on shovel-ready projects, male-dominated industries, the jobs of the past and not of the future. But long before the pandemic, the narrative we've been having around our existing economy was being questioned, certainly by the women who are here today having this conversation. What its role really is in society, because as Deborah Cheetham said the other day, we all want to live in a society with an economy, not in an economy with a society attached. Who is currently benefiting from the economy? How is it being measured? And as we've slowed down over the last few months and had time to reflect on what we value in our lives today, including the type of work we value, we can perhaps start to build a new economy providing opportunities for all citizens, one which prioritises sustainable businesses and places people, the planet, and local solutions at its heart. So this afternoon, you're going to hear from these women who are flourishing to build back better. Leanne De Souza, well-known and much admired executive in the Queensland music industry, co-owner and non-executive director of Nightlife Music, co-founder of the Rock and Roll Writers Festival, not currently rock and rolling, and currently board member of QPAC and chair of the Electronic Music Conference Advisory Board. Leanne's going to start today in conversation with the equally dynamic Wurrumai woman Lydia Fairhall and share an intimate conversation on next economy models for releasing music, whilst trying to balance the constant dualities and tensions that emerge within the creative, business and domestic spheres of life. I'd like to acknowledge also their co-collaborators, one of who's just disappeared, the two Debs sitting at the back, who are also part of this way of bringing the business to the future in Guardians of Purpose system. Lydia is an amazing musician. Lydia and the She-Oaks, who will be performing for you later, will be releasing their debut album True North in November. Their first single, Somebody's Daughter, peaked at #1 and stayed at the AMRAP charts for 6 weeks. And the second single, Sign of the Times, was released just last week. You're going to have just had a chance to hear Lydia perform. To respond to their conversation, before you get a chance to, I'm going to bring in founder and director of the Yiliyapinya Indigenous Corporation, Sheryl Batchelor, who'll talk about the rise of digital health and how her non-profit organisation is using neuroplasticity programs to improve lives. And Jade Collins, who has an extensive traditional corporate background, but for the past 4 years, has been using consumer and procurement activism. Don't you love that? Can I say it again? Consumer and procurement activism to progress gender equality as co-founder and director of Femeconomy. Thank you, all of you, and I'm going to turn immediately to you, Lydia, to start to just talk us through what it is you've been doing and to start the conversation between you and Leanne on the model you're creating.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Probably just to start right at the very beginning, my family is from the Wurrumai Nation, Gumapingu clan. We're Saltwater River people, and my old people's name is Manton. Some of you might recognise that name. So I acknowledge all the senior women in the room. Thank you so much for being here. It's a real honour. My great-grandmother was born at the mission at Karua, and she married an Indian man. And for a very short time assumed that identity because it was the safest thing for her to do. And it meant she could work, so they both spent their whole lives laying that railway line up and down the east coast. So my grandma, they kind of gradually, migrated north, and my grandma was born in a tent along the river at Kyogle. And now I live on beautiful Gubbi Gubbi country in the bush, and doing a lot of bush regeneration work up there as well. But I've always worked in the arts as both an artist and an arts worker. My very first gig was in remote communities, so on the Ananu Pitjantjatjara Yunkanjatjara lands. And out there at the time, there was a real experience of loss of language. And so we played so much country music and reggae music in language as a way of preserving language. And I guess that first kind of experience has been so influential on the way that I work now. I went from that into hardcore mainstream arts, very conservative corporate arts world, and something was brewing in me all along. And it was this thing that surely when we make these beautifully polished experiences for people, surely there's a way that we can also be well for ourselves, for our people, and for the land whilst we're doing it. And I had 2 pretty high-profile jobs, one at Footscray Community Arts Centre And Footscray at the time was buzzing. You know, we had this vibrant Elders in Residence program, a curatorium. We had 8 out of our 23 staff were blackfellas. Like, it was amazing. You know, we were right there at that time when breaking ground. But still, the whole time I kept thinking, why are we all so burnt out? And why is the process so hard? And why are we still scrounging, you know, for every dollar? And I thought it must be because this is a white organisation. So I went and ran Ilbidgery Theatre Company as the co-CEO and executive producer. And at the end of that experience, I was like, it's not that either. There's something there's something very conservative and very corporate about the heart of the way we're running these arts companies, even the ones that were created to be the most radical systems change companies. So I started this journey scouring the world at Ilbidgery, looking for a business model that would most closely align with the ways of our old people. And I really started to embrace this idea that businesses are living organisations. But what I realised very quickly was that I couldn't run the company and do that work at the same time. So I stepped out, and now over the last 18 months, I've moved all of my work into that kind of next economy space. And I still support Ilbidgery in exploring, and Footscray, all of them, in exploring kind of new ways of thinking and old ways of thinking and being. So I guess at the very heart of it, it's this idea that business is a living organisation, and I've always been taught you look to country and you look to the land, and when we start to see those principles in business, we can start to see a way out of an extractive narrative, an extraction narrative that takes from people, that takes from spirit, that takes from country. So there were 3 kind of big things that spurred me on. The first was that in nature, country survives when it has the most biodiversity, and places in ecotones where 2 different environments meet are the most resourced. And if we're looking around in our businesses and we only see the same type of people, we are not going to be sustainable over the long term. So that was a lot of the work we were doing at Footscray. People with perceived disability, trans community, black people of colour. We were really, you know, looking to that space as a way of survival, you know. The second was that nature doesn't like a vacuum. And so that canopy, the most sacred country of all, which is also teeming with life up there, the trees will always lean in to fill that vacuum. So in terms of business, the more we don't know, the more that inspiration will come. So we're sitting in a place of not knowing a lot at the moment. And then the third one was really around, in nature, hierarchies always rise and fall. There's always a hierarchy, but it's not the same one. And, you know, at my place at the moment, the carpet pythons are dominating again. They're the bosses at the moment, but they haven't been for a while. And anyway, that kind of thinking, I was like, how can I give this a bell? And I thought, well, you know what, at my true purpose, I'm an artist. I might as well test this out on my album. I just recorded an album. And then it was time to kind of think about who to bring in on the team. And I loved this idea that rather than having a management team or a board, that we would have guardians of purpose. And that the purpose is to evolve humanity's relationship to power. And particularly in this instance, the artist's relationship to power. Because, you know, it's so obvious now in the middle of COVID, the artist is at the bottom of the pile. There's no work, there's no money coming, there's no opportunities, but the administrators and marketing teams, you know, that's all still cracking along, and the companies are okay, but the artists, it's really, really tough. So the Guardians of Purpose, Leanne De Souza, Deb Suckling and Deb Gann, all have really traditional kind of mechanical functions in terms of publicity, business development, live strategy and digital release, but we hold space in a really different way. That's kind of secondary to the bigger macro conversation. And I guess Leanne and I have both walked away from those big jobs in the arts. And I always was kind of admiring that, and also really conscious that we both had been hurt by that grind culture. You know, it's too much. And of course, Leanne's name was at the top of the list when we were going, who could we do really radical stuff with that, if anything was going to bring Leanne back into this space, I thought maybe it's this.
So maybe Leanne, if you could talk through.
It's wonderful to hear that story from the beginning again. Thank you.
Yeah.
Like we get even though you sort of step out and we're trying to do something new and radical, we still get dragged into the minutiae.
Yeah.
So it's nice just to sit back and hear it again.
You've developed. I know some of the first work and the conversations that we're having were around developing guiding principles, and I think we've got those guiding principles. Everybody's got them on their seat somewhere. Maybe if you can talk through the process of how you actually got there.
Well, I think for me it was actually it was Deb Suckling who's here on a Zoom call. I think it was the first or second week of lockdown when we were all literally shuddering, and Lydia and I had been in contact over the years, you know, Facebook Messenger and what have you. And then Deb Suckling had said to me, I don't know, there's some money in a budget here that I'm not sure what Lydia wants really, but it's not really management, but it's sort of a new business model. And anyway, I mean, okay, that sounds interesting. And so it starts with a whole lot of conversations, and it's, you know, you in business when people talk about core values or your purpose or your mission or your strategies, etc. But I sort of thought, okay, we can't, this is what excites me about working with Lydia, is taking me on a journey of a process. It was never about manage me and get a gold record, or manage me and, you know, this outcome. And so then I thought, okay, the first step for that is I really need to deeply understand who Lydia is as an artist and what is the purpose of us. Like, there's no point in me trying to come up with a strategy without deeply understanding that. And being a purpose, it really has to, I kept thinking, and I'm not a theorist in this whole area. There's some amazing minds in the room when it comes to next economy and all of this. This is sort of new to me. All I knew is I'm very good at manifesting and making something from a theory into a doing. So the first thing was that I really need to understand what are our principles of how we're going to work together. And I think that was the question that and I thought I can't just conjure that up without understanding what that is. So I think I've got to think back now. The process, I wrote Lydia a long list of reflective questions.
That's huge. I don't think I ever fully finished them, but anyway, we got that.
Which I pulled from some of my own previous understanding, a little bit of the work of Frederick Laloux, who Lydia had put me on to, Reinventing Organisations. It's got a fantastic list of questions. I know a lot about copyright, and I'm quite... I'm willing to challenge the notion of Western, it's a very Western ownership, singular idea of copyright. So I really wanted to interrogate how music sits within that. So it's a long list of questions. Lydia did an amazing cover story interview on Dumbo Feather that actually at Byron Writers Festival last year I'd read, and I think I messaged you. I said, Lydia, I was crying reading this article. So I went back, I read that, I listened to some podcasts and some interviews and did what you're doing, Cathy. Thought, what are the questions that this is intriguing me? So we went through that whole process, and then I distilled it really, didn't we? We distilled it. And I also am really fascinated by alchemy, and as a methodology, better way to live, and energetically and historically what alchemy meant. So I love this sort of distill, and until we got to some really key, pointy things. And then I went up to your place and listened and bounced stuff off Lydia, and then I start drawing pictures, and I'm a big trying to, when I'm thinking of conceptualising. And that's where the picture started to come from, which you've all got there for your reference. Because we sort of talked a lot about, do you want to talk through the picture maybe?
Yeah.
Because at that point then we kind of distilled it and went, this feels right. Maybe talk that through, and then I'll talk about how we apply it.
Yeah. I think one of the main goals for us in this as well was acknowledging there are some businesses that have made big leaps into the next economy, and Leanne mentioned Frederick Laloux's work, he calls them teal companies. And so the things that these teal companies all have in common is a focus on self-management, a lot of autonomy for people in their workplace or in their business, wholeness and evolutionary purpose. And the only way you can really have autonomy and self-management is if you have a really explicit set of values and principles. So it means that whenever any one of us in this team of 4 are making a decision, we don't have to consult or ask permission or do any of that. We just come back to our values, and that helps us make all of the decisions we need to make.
Can I pick up on this? It's okay if we do this, isn't it, Cathy?
Yeah, keep going. Keep going, makes my job easy.
It's one of those words you hear it mentioned, responsibility, self-responsibility, self-autonomy. But that, really embodying that, to me, was a revelation, because I'd been an artist manager in the old paradigm, where the artist manager is like the leader and makes stuff happen and is the responsible one, and the artist is this magician that creates music. And there's always been this tension between the artist being responsible and having self-responsibility and the manager. So this was a revelation in the Guardians of Purpose. So that was the very first, for me, value that I went, okay, I'm going to now apply this. What's it mean when I'm really self-responsible? Not just a project, but in everything. It's been transformative. And I think with all the 4 Guardians, that was probably the first pillar.
Well, I guess it's why self-healing is at the top, because to come together and do this work, we all do have to tend to our inner worlds and be really diligent in our inner worlds. And so the kind of through line is oneness, and this is a tricky one because, we talk a lot about that spiritual bypass as Aboriginal women. Like, everyone wants to talk about oneness but doesn't want to have the other conversation. And so I find this the trickiest thing to talk about because it is a fine line. But we are deeply interconnected as human beings. And although we have unique struggles and triumphs, as Warramai person, as a First Nations person, whatever it might be, we also have universal connection and life force. And so oneness became a really important thing. I did this beautiful workshop last week with Julia Kim, who's the Centre of Gross National Happiness for Bhutan, and that's their version of GDP. They're now carbon positive, doing as a country, amazing things. And she was talking about the fact that for the 3rd year in a row, majority groups' life expectancy has decreased in the US. And they're calling these deaths the deaths of despair because it's drugs, alcohol, suicide, mental health. And so we're 200 and something years into this colonial capitalist paradigm now, and we're so conscious that it is at breaking point. Even the boss country of it is not winning in this story at all. And so we're also aware, and I think that resilience as a black fella comes into it too, because we've had to change so much and transition so much, but we're also aware that we have transitioned economies before and will again. So and a lot of what we're talking about in this space is not that we don't have the skills or the knowledge, but that it's a crisis of the imagination. We just haven't been dreaming into the future. We've been talking about the what isness, what's not working, and we're all really conscious of that, well, in these kinds of spaces.
Yes, some of us are. Yes.
But that's not enough because we can just get stuck there. So the dreaming and the imagination is so important, and that's why that kind of forms the big circle around the outside. Imagine, I've had the most beautiful spiritual teacher in my life, and the one thing that I always come back to, imagination is the true vision, and our old people knew that. So how do we bring that forward into our companies and businesses and houses and
So that's what you've been doing. You've been actually putting it into practice in relation to the release of the recent.
Absolutely.
So how
probably just one thing to pick up is the duality, which is the other really common thing that we're finding as we do the work together. This idea of nothing is, we're pushed to binaries all the time. The masculine, the feminine, the qualitative, quantitative, blah, 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 but also the creative process in business. And often in the music industry or any creative, there's always that tension between art and commerce. So we've tried really hard, the 4 of us, to find that it's all this sort of balance always between what serves the art, what serves the business, but find the middle. And so that's where these sort of parallel streams, they're both, it's sort of, I wouldn't say codependent, it's not a right word, but they are interconnected.
Yeah.
So I, as a sort of, say, guardian within the guardians of the process, one of the first things we do is how we meet and collaborate. And, we have a weekly meeting, and it's like there's some flexibility at times around life, but we found a way that it's really important in that meeting process. It's not just a list of to-dos or someone with a hierarchy running an agenda or telling people what to do. It is centering Lydia and Lydia's purpose. We are the guardians of purpose. It's checking in at the beginning. It's bringing in all of the noise, I suppose, from the world in order to centre ourselves together. We take a couple of moments to acknowledge where we are and feel the country we're on, and be quiet and meditate or breathe together. And then the first thing, and it is the management of what's at the top of Lydia's brain space that we've just got to deal with, so we can remove that as a worry, and that doesn't then dominate the rest of the conversation. And then allow the fluidity of this. So when we look at the values in the bottom here, this whether faith, abundance, reciprocity, there's things that then we go, okay, well, how the decision whether it's a release date. And so something that in the music industry is and a lot of you would know in corporate world, so obsessed with deadlines and timelines. And I made a promise to myself to never use a Gantt chart ever after I did it once. I hate them. So we don't have really fixed timelines and deadlines other than knowing when it's all right and it served Lydia's purpose and all of that. So there's this sort of fluidity. So the music's come out at the time that actually has done all of this, and we don't feel depleted. We haven't made rush decisions. We're not making the wrong decision to push to somebody else's extractive agenda to get the most clicks or the most views or whatever. So the meeting process itself is one example. And at the moment we're really, and this is why Lydia said we feel like, we're up here talking to you, but we're no experts at this. We're in the middle of the thick of some really gnarly thinking of how to, well, for me...
This is what's great, the gnarly thinking. That's what people want,
because
is the gnarly thinking.
You want to go back to what you always knew and your habits and how you always did it, all that old way. And I've tried to not do anything the way I've always done it with this. So now we're trying to think of that great question, which is how will we know when it's successful? I'm wrestling with this daily, so...
and I think... we're working to different kinds of bottom lines. So we're not obsessed with numbers anymore. That's a small part of what we do. We're not looking at dollars or data in that context. We're more focused on deeply listening to what the world is asking from us. And what's happening in the world, and is this song this moment the right song, or is this gig the right opportunity, or what are we in our deep listening being called to? And so it does become a very organic process.
It is.
And our bottom lines are financial prosperity is a part of it, because we are transitioning. I feel like at the moment we're in this space of midwifing and hospicing at the same time. We're still part of the old economy and that capital colonial world, but we know it's falling away. So it's this constant tension between letting go, grieving, and reimagining. So financial prosperity is one of our bottom lines, as well as caring for country, spiritual wellness, and human flourishing. And so even in a recording context, and this was before we had the team with me and my musical collaborators, were like, we're not spending 14 hours in a black box recording studio. That is not how we ever had music in our lives before colonisation. So we went to a beautiful wooden studio with lots of light, and we spent a whole day out bush with an elder first, in deep connection to each other and the land, before we even stepped foot into the rehearsal room. And we capped it at 7-8 hours a day, so we can go home to our families and refill our cups. And But then it's the same in the gig context. It's like touring is not good for country. It's not good for my little ones. It's never, you're barely breaking even most of the time. Like there's so many, why?
Which is a really meaningful conversation we had the last time we went up and started to talk about this, was in that question of how will we know when it's successful, rather than thinking about how many tickets you sold or that old touring model, etc. And I had just I'd done a healing and I'd done a lot of reading about the senses and how we measure through our senses, what we see, feel, taste, touch. And I just kept saying that I just can't get past this idea from an audience, like when they experience, and you will get to experience as Lydia's music shortly. But maybe it's my challenge to you, is I would love to know, what do you see, hear, feel, taste, smell? So we started to talk about ways that we could actually have a conversation with audiences and people's experience music that is different to that. So we're not even there yet, but they're the kinds of ways we're trying to think.
Questioning everything.
Yeah, and
about the model.
The more I think about that, the more I could, I noticed myself going to a Brisbane Festival show. Well, what do I see, feel, hear, taste, touch? And that energy exchange with the artist as an audience, I'm really excited about thinking about it that way.
And it's always, but for me, it's like, do I feel alive? Because I've just done so much work in community development, human services, all of that was good, important work. But over time, I did feel like that life force was falling away. And so as long as we still have a sense of aliveness in our work, that's a measurement of success. Are our bodies reacting against this? Are we stressed? Are we, So how we actually end up measuring that, who knows? But we are asking those questions.
Can I, just for time's sake, I'm going to have to move on. And so I'd like to bring you in first, Sheryl, to respond. But first of all, talk a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing and the work of the organisation, which I think is fascinating.
So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge our other Indigenous and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women in the group in the room here, as well as online, and also the emerging Indigenous women. And I'd really love to see more Indigenous women coming into the entrepreneurial space, and willing to support that in any way I can, especially in rural and remote areas. But for me, my journey started as a teacher, becoming very frustrated in the system where I was using really good evidence-based programs to help our kids with literacy and numeracy, but I wasn't getting anywhere. And I thought to myself, there must be more to this that I'm missing. And I started reading the book, The Brain That Changes Itself. And from there, I learnt about this thing called neuroplasticity. And it meant that we can change our brain. And I thought, really? Because this advising visiting teacher just told me this child that was transitioning from year 7 to year 8 is going to be a basket breather for the rest of his life, because he's got intellectual impairment and he's also got left hemisphere damage and he's got spina bifida. And I thought, that's really wrong. There's something really wrong about that. And I thought, if this neuroplasticity stuff is true, then I should be doing something about that as a teacher. And so I asked the school board if I could work with this child for 10 weeks using one of the programs that was actually in that book, as well as a literacy intervention program. And I actually got him reading, writing, remembering his name, his phone number and all that. And I was just totally elated. And I just went, I think I found the answer. So excited. And I went to the board, and this young person had turned into a really typical teenager, which I thought was also awesome. And he came into the room with attitude, and he read his story and he said, there, I told you so. And I'm going, this is going to be great. I'm going to turn this school upside down. And the principal at the time and the board said to me, you've done your job. You've got 600 other kids out there that need your help, because I was a learning support coordinator and deputy principal. Get out there. And I went, I can't do this anymore. So I sort of started taking this idea of neuroplasticity further and thinking, my goodness, what can I do to bring this out to schools and the community so that we don't feel so helpless? And my mission really was looking at mental health and sort of slashing it, and also disabilities and slashing it, and changing it into brain health is everybody's business. and taking it from just going to talk from a psychiatrist and getting medication, which is all really important. But I was thinking there's something else we can do. So I was very fortunate enough, I worked on a project for 8 years and I got trained in a lot of neuroplasticity programs in the USA and Canada. So I thought this was pretty awesome. So hopped on a plane, went to Canada, did this neuroplasticity program for 3 weeks, really engrossed in it. Here I was thinking, I've got my master's, I've got 2 degrees, I've got this, I'm a pretty smart chickie babe. Realise that I wasn't there. My working memory, my attention, my brain speed was not in the normal range. And I thought, holy, what's going on here? So it really made me stop and reflect that this is not just for the kids, that this is about the teachers who are under stress. This is about the mums and dads. This is about the businesses. This really is everybody's business. So from there, I hooked up with a neuroscientist at QUT and I said, can you please explain to me what's going on in my brain when this happens? And I started really understanding what that meant. And why I was doing the things that I was doing is because my brain was doing its job and that was keeping me safe. And it was telling me these little lies that I was believing. And I thought, you really? My brain's telling me fibbies and I don't have to do what my brain tells me to do. So with this neuroscientist, we did a trial with children in foster care, and we also did a trial with children in the Youth at Brisbane Detention Centre, where we looked at bringing these programs into those places, and there was a couple of goals. One is we wanted to teach them about their brains. We wanted to teach them about the amygdala, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex. We wanted to tell them about the vagus nerve being connected to their stomach. Because when you know, then you can do something about it. So we wanted them to understand their behaviour. And you know what? I remember this 10-year-old running around and saying to me, my amygdala's going nuts. I need to go in my tent and I'm going to have a good talk to it. I thought, yes. This is this kid that's on his way to residential care because he was in a specialist foster care situation that were really willing to get rid of him. I thought, yes, if he can understand himself, then wow, I've achieved something here. Then it became about rewiring his brain, about how he can help himself to calm himself down. So these neuroplasticity programs that I use are about practicing improving your working memory, improving your cognitive skills, improving your inhibition control, your social and emotional learning without someone else telling you what to do. And that's the biggest part, and that was a revelation for me and a revelation when I saw kids going off the rails. So what I do is that's my goal, is to work in the cognitive space and that, but it comes back to the self-healing, doesn't it? Very much to self-healing is about understanding the brain. And when you were talking just then, my mirror neurons were going nuts because I was just thinking to myself, this is what's going on here, is that you women have come together with a common purpose, but you're actually being vulnerable. So you're sharing your vulnerabilities, you're sharing your capabilities in a very safe place. And that's what we need to move forward in the new economy. Like I've set up an Indigenous corporation that's not for profit, that's a registered charity, but I'm the only member. Now usually in an Indigenous corporation you have to have 10 members, but I fought that. I said, why do I need 10 people telling me what to do? And why do I need to check in with them all the time? Yep. If I've got the experience, this is about me. This is about me working together with other people. And then I went on and talked about, so anyway, it took 1.5 years, but I convinced them that I was a very capable woman and that I was capable of running a not-for-profit on my own. But I do have a group of women that are advisors around me that work together and put me in line that I can share and be vulnerable with them about, am I going the right way, or whatever that might be. So I was really keen to hear that with you. I felt that there's some synergy about I was going on that path, but I may not have realised it. The other part that I thought that was really good is about really thinking deeply. And during this COVID stress conversations that are going on is that when we're under stress, our prefrontal cortex just doesn't kick in. And that's where innovation, creativity, curiosity comes from. And by you having your meetings together and actually creating that space of let's just stop and just do nothing, getting our brain to not think of anything. And usually when we have our brain breaks, we are meditating, but meditating is actually using our prefrontal cortex still. So when we take some breaks, we really just need to not do anything and just stare into space. So my mission is to share all these things and share being innovative in that an Indigenous woman in a not-for-profit can still be innovative. I can still be an entrepreneur. I can collaborate, but what does really collaboration mean? It doesn't mean you have this box and I have this box. And I like what you said before about having a clean slate, but we're coming together with a purpose, and that is to help everyone. And I think that that when you really think deeply, like you were talking about, the imagination and the innovation can really shine through, but we need to be able to create the space for that. And whatever that might look like for you is different.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Can I say one
do you want to respond?
Before we get, because thank you. That was awesome to get feedback. What a great idea. But that imagination, it's interesting because I had always thought this, that you think deeply and you imagine, but often it was like, I think it's, this white dominant way to make it complex. But some of the greatest breakthroughs we have, I feel, has been where we've thought deeply and imagined, and the answer's actually been something very simple to move forward. And that, I think we fall in this trap that imagining and, dreaming something new needs to be really complex and difficult, and it's not.
What we do, and my co-founder Alana was actually meant to be here today, but she is stuck in regional New South Wales, unable to get across the border, so you have me instead. So what we do is to educate people on how their purchasing and procurement decisions can create gender equality. And how all of that started was, as Cathy mentioned, way back about 5 years ago. And for most of my life, I have been working in corporate career in human resources, largely in heavy industry, very traditional male-dominated industries. And I happened to be in a Melbourne taxi and I was reading a Harvard Business Review article, and I read the statistic that women make 85% of purchase decisions, and it blew my tiny mind. I was like, what? I have read diversity and gender equality literature for years and I've never come across this statistic. This is power.
Something somebody wasn't telling you.
Exactly. It was a secret that they'd hidden from me all this time, but it was actually power that women had all of this time already in our hands. And I just became obsessed with that statistic and thinking, okay, I spend all of this time trying to convince executives that they should employ more women and have more women in leadership, and a lot of the narrative is trying to convince people in power that they should cede some of that power to create more gender equality. But I thought, no, what if we flipped that now and women knew which organisations had women in leadership, not just talked about having women in leadership, and then they could apply their purchasing decisions and their procurement decisions to that. And that actually drives bottom lines in a different way, because as customers, as consumers, we are very powerful. So I really did become obsessed with it. And short story, I started researching companies, and 2000 to start with, I convinced my sister-in-law, who is my business partner, to become my business partner, largely by continuously bullying her while she was at home trying to raise 2 small children. And I chucked my corporate career and just, much to the dismay of my husband, who had been a stay-at-home carer for our daughter for 6 years, and we had sort of done the very different way of things. So I was the primary breadwinner. He was just going back into his career, and he'd changed careers 3 times in order to follow my career around Australia. So, but the way that we approached it was very much to the points that have already been talked about, was in a co-creation way. So we started off knowing that this thing had power, but we didn't really know what our business model would be, and we had an absolutely rubbish business model to start with that we very quickly, within about 3 months, went, oh no, this is terrible, we've got to chuck that, and quite quickly started to think about, well, okay, what are the options out there? But because Alana's background is all in community development and in marketing and international marketing, and she'd done a lot of work in the community development space, she was really the pilot guide in saying, okay, no, we need to go out and engage with people and talk to our audience, and actually to co-create Femeconomy to be something that women want it to be, and an organisation that is creating gender equality with the underpinnings of using our purchasing decisions, using our procurement muscle and our purse power, but how we actually get there can be informed by our stakeholders. And I suppose with both having come from corporate careers or very much business backgrounds, we had lived a lot of that, it's not even 9 to 5, it's like 6 to 6 plus, it's, and it's constant travel. And, when I didn't really see much of my daughter for the first 6 years of her life, whilst my husband was, full-time primary carer. And that really just, that model of capitalist endeavour in organisations that isn't purpose-driven, where you actually can't connect properly to purpose of what you're doing, actually starts to chip away at your spirit. And I became a smaller and smaller and smaller version of myself in that. So we were determined to not create that same system for ourselves in an organisation. And so we both, from the start, were working flexibly and remotely. So I live in Brisbane, Alana lives in Pottsville, which is in northern New South Wales, about 20 minutes north of Byron Bay. She started working in the business 2 days a week. She would have her children at community daycare and be working from the doll's house. So like the family play corner with her laptop. And that's really how we started and how we continue. So it has to fit our lives, and it's something that we very consciously are loud about and role modelling and talk to all of our members and people around us about. It's actually possible to build a national membership organisation from home, remotely, flexibly, with this paradigm shift. But some of the themes that are similar across it's about that reciprocity of knowledge sharing. And from the start, we've had advisors and mentors like Cathy and Lee, who have given of their time and their knowledge and their wisdom to our endeavour quite, freely and generously. And that is, I think, how you build a community and a business. And to me, it seems much more like a traditional way of approaching business than than the corporate superstructures that we have now.
I think we're supposed to be using.
Yeah, I think a lot of our leadership are lost at the moment, and particularly at the moment where all of these structures are being dismantled and reshaped, and they don't know how to transform themselves, because it has to start, I think, with a strong self-belief in what you're doing, and that's what roots you. That's the core of what you're doing.
Do you respond to that, do you too, in terms of...
I've got something I'd love to ask.
Yeah.
Jade, is that allowed? Do you... the other way? Or point out? Because this...
You're allowed, it's your house, yes.
It's my house, and it's
You can do
and it's
what you
Lydia's
like.
music where you're going to see it shortly.
Yeah.
But I'm fascinated by this idea of procurement and procurement activism. And it's something in the music industry which is just... seems to me blindingly obvious, but it doesn't happen. But not just gender procurement, but also our Torres Strait Islander musicians, I believe, and that's if we could all just listen and add it to your playlist before you go. But in procurement, so it comes back, and I'll be really quick with it, but in the copyright space again. So all the government, so local government, state government, federal government, all have to pay to play music on hold or in their events or in their public spaces. They all have to have a licence. It's just the way it is. But that they're using licenses where no one's checking what they're playing. And now in a data world, we have all the data in the world with streaming music, etc. Procurement to say, well, you've got to have the license, so hold them accountable to play A, Australian music, and B, preferably First Nations music, and C, preferably female First Nations music, would actually then, the economic flow on from royalties is just there. So it's this, and also, that for all of you, just so you know, so when your Spotify that you play at home, that isn't allowed in public performance. So if you play, if the government, which they are using Spotify in their procurement, those artists are never going to see that money. That data just goes off into the big mega data of the global. So it's just this really simple thing in procurement that's like, if we could do more procurement activism across the creative industries, our artists that are the ones breaking through this time will receive royalties from work they've already created. We don't even have to fund the work, it's done.
Brilliant.
So it just is, to me, we just need this little switch.
Leanne, let me introduce you to Jade Collins. She's
in real life, not on LinkedIn.
Leanne was so excited to meet Jade today. It was wonderful.
Yeah, it's just these little shifts. But how do we connect across the economy, the people that have got the solutions?
There's a couple of other people I'd like to bring in to respond. And sorry, Sarah, because you're sitting here and you actually have a job in that major organisation called the government, I just wondered if you'd like to respond to what you've heard.
But no, it's really, really wonderful to be here. The thing that stuck out for me, and I've got it in bold in this, what I've been writing about, is this purpose piece. Because I actually feel, as I'm sitting here with a million things swirling around my neuroplastic brain, is that it's not about a new economy, it's actually about new humanity. And how we exist as humans. Economy is just a way of giving you resources to stay alive and be a human. And I'm really struck by this purpose piece. I think I absolutely love that piece that you've all been talking about, and you all have your purpose that you've been brave enough to step out and grasp and take, because we only live this one life. So I'm just so thrilled to hear all of your journeys. Another thing that was really like a kick in the guts was imagination is missing. So I moved to Queensland, 6 weeks pre-COVID.
Well, look at you.
I feel you're talking about we've had time for reflection, introspection. I don't feel like I've had any time for reflection, introspection. I've just been running to try and help as much as I possibly can, and it's absolutely true. If you don't stop and think, you don't have this time for the imagination. So again, thanks for this time to stop. It's been brilliant to sit in this chair and stop and listen and think. And we certainly need to be creative to get us out of this and into what is next, and not step back to what was, because I think that would be the biggest disaster if we didn't. And honestly, I don't think we can. I just don't think it's possible. This purchasing decisions piece, and I use that statistic to help people understand from a business perspective, because I'm in the male world and I'm quite male, hey, male world. There's actually a reason, even in a male world, to have women in leadership, because actually, guess what? Women make decisions. So if you have got no women on your board and no women in leadership, you are not developing the products and the services that the people making the decisions are wanting. So that's great. A couple of things. One is around collaboration. I'm a massive into collaboration. We will not get to the new economy without collaborating. We cannot build new economies without collaborating.
That's that collective thing about, yes, we can all see this links, and possibly so many others. Sandra at the back there nodding her head like crazy. But how do we connect it together? And I want to bring in Anne, who had and then I'll go back, I saw you with your hand. Anne, just from your perspective, because I know Anne is from Griffith University, and is doing a lot of thinking about this at the moment, including how we do it.
Yes, thank you, Cathy. And can I just say thank you so much, everybody, for what's just been an absolutely fascinating conversation, I think. Griffith's been doing a lot of work around the regenerative economy and what might that look like and what might it mean. But I think we're seeing people not waiting for power and exercising the power they have. And actually, Queensland Government's got an awesome procurement policy. They've got an awesome social procurement policy. I don't even think they understand how good it is and its potential to unlock a whole variety of things in the inclusive growth space and in innovation, which is the 1,000 things you do every day. It doesn't have to be the great reveal, because the great reveal is not coming. I've been really struck this afternoon, Cathy, by so many things people have said, but I've been really struck by the extent to which ideas have sparked many of you. But Leanne, you said it, the embodied, you're all so curious, why is that? And then something, an idea has struck you and then you've grabbed it, but that idea would be meaningless without the embodied experience and action. And I think we've done ourselves such a disservice as a community by devaluing practical, there's the Prime Minister talking, practical, that's a code, everyone, we can talk about later, embodied knowledge, the things that are meaningful, but the idea often sparks it. I just wanted to sort of say something. I think, I'm really struck by all of you have commented in different ways on the lack of imagination, on imagination as a driver. A lot of the political instability and challenges that we've lived with are explained by, it really is the end of the ideas paradigm. Neoliberal thinking, colonial capitalist paradigms are really collapsing under their own weight. And I guess I'm really interested in the cognitive scarcity of those who hold power, because they can't have these thoughts, but moreover, they're coreless. Because career politics has stripped people and these corporate lives have stripped people of the ability to believe and know. So I think that's been a revelation, to use your words, to me, about what an opportunity for experimentation and decentered models of the kind that you are all doing. You don't have to wait for anybody to do it. So I think the regenerative economy is going to be the one that people describe, because they can see how broken it is, and you don't have to wait.
I love that, not waiting.
No, because the better normal is only going to come if people demand it. The broken systems can't deliver it.
And it wasn't normal in the first place.
No, deeply not normal, Cathy, that's true.